Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about how to factor trinomials. A trinomial is a polynomial that has three terms. So you can see here, terms are separated by pluses or minuses. So we have three terms here, x squared, 9x, and 20. Notice none of these terms have a GCF, a common factor. However, there's another method of factoring where you basically are going to take the trinomial, and I call double bubble it. It's going to factor into two binomials. So it's almost like a reverse way of foiling. Keep in mind, when the instructions say factor, your answer is going to look like a multiplication problem. Okay, so it's either going to be something where you can distribute, like in the last video, or something where you can FOIL, or maybe a combination of the two. So in an earlier video, we went through this example, and we had to FOIL this y plus 5. We had to multiply y plus 5 by itself. And I'm just going to remind you guys of how we arrived at y squared plus 5y plus 5y plus 25. We arrived there because first we multiplied y by y to get this y squared, and then the outer and inner terms made the 5y plus 5y, which in the all four of the terms, these are your only like terms. Okay, so those actually end up getting combined, and then these last terms get multiplied to make the last term. So we kind of have to think in reverse in order to go from a trinomial. By the way, this simplifies to a trinomial, y squared plus 10y plus 25, because 5y and 5y make 10y. So going in reverse from something like this to something like this, again, you kind of have to think backwards. This first term here came from these two. This last term here came from these two, and also from the fives, because the fives multiply to give you that 25, but then they also add to give you that 10y. So we're going to have to think of those ideas in factoring. So again, our first terms here will make this first term x squared, so an x times an x will do that job. Now the 20 we consider, remember that okay, so remember that whatever signs and numbers are going behind the x's are both multiplying to give you this last number and adding to give you this middle number. So we want to start with numbers that multiply to give us 20, because that's a much smaller set of numbers to go through than the numbers that add to give you 9. So you always kind of skip over this term when factoring, and skip to this last term to consider our options. Sometimes students have a hard time remembering that because it's natural to want to just go in order, but that's just a trick you have to keep in mind when it comes to factoring. So I can think of three sets of numbers that make 20, but remember there's two requirements. The two requirements are that not only do they have to multiply to make 20, but they have to add to make 9. So 1 times 20 does multiply to make 20, but it adds to make 21, not 9. Okay, 4 times 5 multiplies to make 20, and 4 plus 5 makes 9. So that is going to work, and I don't even have to worry about trying the 2 and 10, but if you think about it, 2 plus 10 makes 12, not 9. So we know that we have our correct solution. What I always recommend in learning how to factor is these rules will make much more sense if you're always checking. So to check your answer, you just FOIL it back out. So x times x gives us x squared. X times 5 gives us 5x. 4 times x gives us 4x. And 4 times 5 gives us 20. And then we know that 5x and 4x does make 9x, so we've kind of checked this, and this is our answer. Remember, we are done when our answer looks like a multiplication problem, which it does. Parentheses and parentheses means multiply. Okay, so moving on to the next example, now we have a negative, so we're going to have to consider that. There's no GCF, so we're going to go straight into double bubbling. We're going to have an x here and an x here. And again, we want factors of 36 that add up to a negative 20 this time. Okay, so most common one to think of would be maybe 9 and 4. And again, we want to make a negative in the middle, so since they're multiplying to make a positive and adding to make a negative, the only way to make that happen is if both the signs are the same. Two negatives when multiplied make a positive, and that's the only way to get a negative in the middle. So either way, negative 9 and negative 4 do not make negative 20, they make negative 13. Maybe you might consider negative 6 and negative 6. That makes negative 12. Also consider that 36 is even, meaning I might want to try 36 divided by 2. So that gives me 18. So 18 and 2 multiply to give me 36, and negative 18 and negative 2 add up to give me negative 20. So you might also, if you don't want to think so hard about the signs, keep in mind when you have a positive here, both the signs have to be the same. So if I have a positive here and a negative here, I'm always going to get a double negative. All right. So again, here we want a double bubble. And again, here we have different signs. So we're going to have to think about that and how that works. This time we want to make a negative 8 when we multiply. Now, to make a negative when you multiply, one number has to be positive and one number has to be negative. Okay? And keep in mind, when one number is positive and one number is negative, we say that those numbers subtract when you combine them. So in other words, if I use a positive 4 and a negative 2, that does multiply to give me a negative 8. When I subtract, that actually gives me a positive 2, since I have more positives than negatives. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to try switching the signs. So a negative 4 and a positive 2. Well, those would combine actually to give me that negative 2 that I want in the middle. So I'm going to use a negative 4 and a positive 2. Now, had you written positive 2 here and negative 4 there, that would still be okay, as long as the negative sign is in front of the 4. So some shortcuts you can take here is you can notice that when the last sign is negative, the signs have to be opposite. And whatever sign is in front of your middle number has to go with your larger factor. So since I have a negative in front of my middle number 2, I want the negative to go in front of my larger factor. My larger factor would be 4, so the negative would go in front of my 4. Again, it can be tedious to remember all of these rules. Your job of increasing understanding is made much easier if you're always checking, because then it just kind of makes sense why you would have a negative in front of the larger of the two factors, and why, if your last sign is negative, these signs would have to be opposite.